Day 1. New Year's Day. Listening 1. Old Lang Syne. Day 1. Listening 2. Welcome to One World, which tonight comes to you from Edinburgh in Scotland. First, let me introduce our guest, Fiona MacDonald, who's going to be talking about New Year's festivals in Japan and China. So, do they have anything in common with what goes on here in Scotland?
Well, in Scotland we only celebrate for one day, whereas in Japan they basically eat, drink and visit shrines for 3 days. And the Chinese have 5 days national holiday.
5 days, but not in January.
Well, the Japanese have the same calendar as us, so they start on January the 1st. But in China, they use the lunar calendar, so it varies from year to year. It's actually called a spring festival, and was the time when farmers and peasants used to rest physically and spiritually before sowing the seeds.
I've heard that in Japan, nearly everyone sends cards at New Year, whereas we generally send our cards at Christmas. Is that true of China too?
I'm not sure that they do, actually. But one thing both countries have in common is that they give their children pocket money. Many Chinese also wear new clothes as a way of leaving behind the old year and all its misfortunes.
So it's a kind of a ritual to bring good luck.
Of course, in Scotland we have the tradition of first footing. You know, when the first person to visit your house in the new year should be handsome and dark-haired.
And a man.
Yes, not a woman, because in some communities they were thought to bring bad luck. And this man was supposed to bring a lump of coal, a lump of bread, and a bottle of whiskey.
What about resolutions? This year I've decided to give up smoking, like I do almost every year. Do the Chinese and Japanese go in for this kind of thing?
Not really, no. But they do make predictions for the future. For instance, at the Japanese shrines and temples, you can find out your fortune from some little bits of paper. Then at 12 o'clock, they ring a gong in a temple 108 times to send away the 108 evil desires in the Buddhist religion.
Day 1. Listening 3.
Well, I think this year I'm going to try and give up chocolate.
Are you?
Yeah, because I eat so much of it. And, you know, it might make me fat or spotty or something, so I think I should, see if I can give it up.
I'd never be able to do that.
What about you? What are you going to do?
I'm definitely going to become more organised from 12 o'clock tonight. Definitely.
Believe that when I see it.
It's true.
I've got 2. I'm going to try... the first one, I'm going to try and stop lying to my parents, because I constantly lie to them all the time. And the second, I've got to stop eating beef burgers.
Why?
I can't stop eating them.
I always find that I eat too much junk food and like McDonald's and beef burgers and things like you say.
Yeah.
I've got to start giving up that and eat more healthily and eat more fruit and vegetables and stuff like that. I always say I'm going to do that. Never do.
Day 1. Listening 4.
In England, the New Year hasn't always begun on January the 1st. Halloween was the Druids' New Year's Eve festival, so what is now our November the 1st would have been their New Year. The Anglo-Saxons then fixed the beginning of the year to coincide approximately with the sun's rebirth on around December the 25th. Then, most of Europe switched their New Year to the beginning of spring. So for many years, March the 25th was New Year's Day. In fact, most of Europe had been following the Julian calendar, which had been designed under the instructions of the Roman Emperor Julius Caesar. But this calendar was too long by over 11 minutes a year, and after a number of centuries, this amounted to 10 days. So in the 16th century, Pope Gregory XIII had a new calendar designed, which revised the concept of leap years and set the beginning of the year to January the 1st. Most of Europe then adopted this new calendar in around 1582, even though it meant cancelling 10 days. The Scots changed to the Gregorian calendar in 1600, as it was obvious that any trading with other countries would be chaotic if they kept to the old Julian calendar. But the English held out until 1752, since they resented a Catholic pope telling them what to do. The Russians waited till 1918, and the Greeks till 1923. Eastern Orthodox churches and the Ethiopians still use the Julian calendar, which is why they celebrate Christmas and Easter approximately 2 weeks later than other Christians.
Day 2. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. Listening 1.
Martin Luther King Jr. was born on 15th January, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. He was a precocious child and was often top of his class. One day, while on the bus to school, some white passengers got on. There were no seats free, and the driver forced Martin and his friends to give up their seats. "I don't think I have ever been so deeply angry in my life," King later recalled. At that time, there were not only separate bus seats for blacks and whites, but also separate drinking fountains, bathrooms, and seats in restaurants. While King was studying theology at university, he was impressed by the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi. King was convinced that the only way to fight against injustice was nonviolence and non-resistance. Just before receiving his degree, he became a pastor like his father of a Baptist church in Alabama. In 1955, an African-American woman was arrested for refusing to give up her bus seat to a white person. King organized a year-long boycott of the buses and formed a carpool of 300 cars to take black people to work. Soon King was imprisoned for conspiracy to boycott a business. Some months later, the Supreme Court of the United States freed King. His formula of passive resistance had won. After this incident, King traveled and delivered speeches demanding equal treatment for all peoples of the United States. King founded a movement which secured black people's right to vote and ended the segregation of public facilities in the South. He went on to organize the massive March on Washington, where he gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech on August 28, 1963. The following year, King became the youngest person to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Early in 1968, King began to plan a multiracial Poor People's March on Washington to demand an end to all discrimination. But he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, on 4th of April, 1968, perhaps by the paid agent of FBI conspirators or white extremists. Riots and demonstrations in 125 cities protested against his killing. 46 people died, and over 20,000 were arrested.
Day 2. Listening 2.
I say to you today, my friend, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
Day 3, Valentine's Day, Listening 1. 1.
On February the 14th, our ancestors believed that birds began to choose their partners and to mate on this day. In fact, some people still believe that the first bird you see on this day will foretell who your future husband is going to be.
2. Valentine was a Roman priest who was jailed in the 3rd century by the Emperor Claudius for marrying young couples. Claudius had made a law against this because he thought that soldiers who were single were better fighters than married ones. While he was in jail, Valentine fell in love with the jailer's blind daughter. He managed to restore her sight, and before his execution he left her a message which simply said, "From your Valentine." 3.
February the 15th was the date of the Roman love festival of Lupercalia. On this day, young Romans gave each other presents. Another custom was for the names of young men and women to be shaken in a box and then drawn like a lottery to make love couples.
Day 3, Listening 2. 1.
I think an ideal friend would be someone you can trust, someone who you can tell your secrets to, and someone who will, of course, keep the secrets, someone who will be honest with you, and who you can just be yourself around. You don't have to feel like you have to be somebody else, and someone that you get along with and that you have fun with, and that's just an ideal friend to me.
2.
An ideal friend to me wouldn't matter if it was a boy or a girl or anything, but as long as I could trust them and tell my secrets, and if they were understanding, and then I'd have to pull my part in being a friend and having a friend too. He or she would have to understand me and try to help me with my problems.
Day 4, Carnival.
So what does carnival actually mean?
Well, the period after Carnival is Lent, and you weren't supposed to eat meat during Lent. So the word carnival actually comes from the Latin carne levamen, meaning taking away the meat.
Right.
Carnival time traditionally begins after Epiphany, or Twelfth Night, and leads up to Mardi Gras, which literally means Fat Tuesday, and was a time when everyone ate as much food as they could before fasting in Lent.
So when did it all begin?
Probably with the Romans and Greeks. It was really part of their spring festivals, and they wore masks and
But it's actually part of the Catholic calendar, isn't it?
Well, it is and it isn't. Like most Christian festivities, it was based on pagan rites, but the church didn't manage to quash the fun part. Just as the Greeks and Romans played jokes on each other at this time of year, later so did the people of many European countries, especially Italy, France, Spain, and Portugal.
And when the Portuguese and French settled in the New World, did they take their traditions with them?
Yes. In fact, when the Portuguese landed in Brazil, they brought with them the entrudo, which was a kind of practical joke, and people used to throw water and flour at each other. And in later periods, the African slaves were allowed to join in the fun, too.
But didn't things get out of hand?
Well, yes, they did. And it's interesting because exactly the same things were going on up in New Orleans in Louisiana, which of course was under French rule. The slaves there as well were going around disguised with masks, and the music and dance in both places still today have strong African influences.
I suppose in New Orleans, Rio de Janeiro and Venice, people have always had great fun outdoors with the dancing, parades and what have you.
Day 5. Fasting. 1.
There's something called zakat that you have to pay, which is 2.5% of your cash savings, which goes away as charity that you have to pay in the month of Ramadan. It's your savings plus things like jewelry, gold, diamonds, or whatever you have. You have to pay 2.5% of that and give it away to charity.
2.
Oh right, Eid is a celebration of the completion of the Quran, the full revelation of the Quran. And we say that during the month of Ramadan, the Quran was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, and Eid is basically a celebration of the fact that we've got our holy book now.
3.
And basically, the Islamic calendar is according to the lunar calendar, which means that it's that, for example, Eid is 10 days before every year, so it can fall any time of the year in your life. And so, of course, you work. I mean, you can't sort of put a school curriculum in accordance with Ramadan, for example, or Eid, because there is no such thing as Ramadan falling during the summer, so you know that you're on holiday and you can fast it, and there are no problems. It's not like that.
4.
It is sort of like a way of purifying your body, because you're purifying your mind as well as your spiritual state, your relationship with your religion. You're starting all over again.
5.
We end the fast at about just after sunset. Just after sunset, because it's not to be confused with the sun worshippers who would start something from the rise, from when the sun rose, and end something when the sun would go down.
6.
What you can't do is basically you can't eat. You can't eat at all. You can't drink water. You can't drink anything. And you can't have sexual intercourse. And, any kind of sexual activity is prohibited during that time, because it's a completely spiritual activity. You're only doing it. It's just between you and God.
Day 6. Women's Day.
But now we're living in an age where sexual equality is the thing, and there's no need for. I mean, if that's the case, why don't we have a Men's Day?
Because you don't have a Men's Day because you get the other 364.
Oh!
Well, actually, I mean, why don't you have a Men's Day? Obviously, men haven't felt the need for one in the same way that women have.
You think it's still as valid to have a Women's Day?
I think it would be valid to have both.
So
actually, I think it's
so where do you
always
stand
a good idea
on
to
women's lib then, if that's the case?
Well, I think that a lot's changed over the last 20 years, and in fact, I feel rather sorry for men these days, because I think the whole women's lib thing has become so strong. Men have actually lost a lot of their sort of powers, and I think they need to come back now, because I think feminism has become so overpowering.
So what do you do? Do you send each other cards?
Well, I don't actually think that Women's Day necessarily has anything to do with women's lib or feminism.
Right.
No, not at all. I think it's just an acknowledgement of women, and I think it came about at a time when women didn't have many rights, and it makes you think about these kinds of questions and how many countries there still are in the world where women don't have rights.
Is it celebrated in India?
As far as I know, it isn't, but there are states in India which are communist, and I know it was taken up by the communist countries, so therefore I would think they would know about it.
Yeah.
There are many countries that are much further ahead than we are here in England, let's face it.
And there are also many countries who still regard women as a lower race.
Day 7, Mother's Day. Listening 1.
Well, years ago I did what every kid did. I went out and got ripped off by the stationery departments, buying very expensive cars, and the florist buying dead flowers. But I'm actually a very new mum myself, and I like it. I like getting the cards and the dead flowers.
If I was a mum,
Yes.
which I'm not yet, but if I was a mum, I would like it as well. My mum is so strange about those kind of celebrations. She doesn't like, mothers. Well, she doesn't like them. She doesn't encourage. She doesn't expect anything. She doesn't really want anything.
But she likes it when she
Now, you
gets
see,
it, I bet.
my
I'm
mother
sure she does.
says, I've got no time for it all. It's American rubbish. But she'd be furious if there wasn't a card, there wasn't the flowers, there wasn't the little present, So that's different. It's a sort of double standard.
Well, it is nice, it is, and it's also nice for the husbands, just for a minute, to have to go out and buy the card for the child to give the mum to say thank you.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that, because I haven't got any kids, but do you know?
Well, it is. Well, that's what I'm saying. As a new mum, I mean, before I was terribly cynical about it, and it is a rip-off. All of these things
Yes.
are actually kind of rip-offs, and it would be much nicer, which is also a thing that my little girl does. She makes things at playgroup to bring home, which is
Oh, well,
lovely.
that's lovely,
Now, that's
yes.
much nicer.
Day 7, Listening 2. 1.
She shouts a lot.
2.
When my mother's angry with me, she doesn't have an angry face.
3.
I don't think I would want her living with me when she gets older.
4.
My mom is the most beautiful person in the world.
5.
I don't see my mommy very often.
6.
The mother is the most important person in the family.
7.
She doesn't approve of my partner.
Day 8, Easter. Listening 1.
Eggs have always been prominent around this season, and most ancient civilizations regarded them as the seed of life and fertility. The Egyptians, Chinese, Greeks and Persians all coloured eggs for their friends. During Lent, eggs and other food were forbidden, but at Easter they were given as presents to family, friends and servants. Chocolate eggs are only a fairly recent invention, and in many parts of Britain and America parents hide them for their children to hunt. A national pastime in Scotland, where Easter Monday used to be known as Egg Monday, is egg rolling. The idea is to see whose egg will reach the bottom of a hill without breaking. The Christian Church managed to adapt this pagan ritual by explaining that it represented the rolling away of the tomb where Christ had been buried. In Avenham Park in Lancashire, England, the annual egg rolling competition attracts up to 40,000 people a year.
Day 8, Listening 2. Tonight, One World takes a look at an incredible ritual that takes place in the Philippine Islands at Easter. First, we're going to listen to a recording I made earlier with an American friend of mine, Pete Forster, and then we're going to discuss what Pete says with our expert, Jan Phillips.
Good evening, Jeff.
Good to have you back, Jan. Well, let's hear what Pete has to say.
What I'm going to relate to you, the best that I can remember, happened a while back when I was about 13 years old, and we went to the Philippine Islands, the Baguio district of the Philippines, with my mother. It's called the crucifixion. What happens is all the young men of the town vie to be picked to be the person crucified. It's a great honor to be picked to be crucified, and 90% of the people that are picked die from it. But they still consider it an honor to their family and to their ancestors and for themselves to be chosen. Is what happens is they take the individual, they'll stone him, such as they did Jesus. They put the the wreath of thorns around the head, and they literally crucify him on a cross, and then they parade him down the streets, and it's pretty much sacrificing their life for their belief.
So, was Pete having me on, Jan?
Not at all. Though I don't think as many as 90% die.
Why the Philippines? Are there many Christians living there?
Well, actually, the Philippines has the biggest Catholic following in Asia. There's nearly 40 million believers. In fact, it was the Spanish who, on Easter Day in 1521, began their conquest of the islands with a celebration of the Catholic Mass. Missionaries then marched with the armies and converted the Filipinos to Christianity, and often forcibly with swords and,
But whatever. Did they manage to stamp out the old beliefs?
No, not really. In fact, as they did elsewhere, the missionaries had to absorb various pagan elements to make the new religion attractive to potential converts. Still today, on some islands, Catholicism and paganism exist side by side. There are still shamans who practice all kinds of magic, voodooism even, using human bones, animal sacrifices, offerings to the spirit of the river.
And is that where the famous psychic surgeons come from?
Yeah, that's right. They say that they can do serious medical operations with just their bare hands.
Cassette 1, Side 2. Day 9, April Fool's Day. Listening 1.
Said a spokesperson from Downing Street, though the Prime Minister hasn't confirmed this as yet. And yet more problems for the government, this time due to daylight saving. The Home Secretary announced yesterday that 3 days will have to be cancelled next month. She explained that since the introduction of daylight saving time, miscalculations have been made when putting the clocks back, with the result that Britain is now 72 hours behind the rest of the world. The 3 days to be cancelled will be April the 5th, April the 12th, and April the 13th. Anyone with questions should contact their local DSS department. And now today's international news. In Paris this morning, residents read that the Eiffel Tower is to be dismantled.
Day 9, Listening 2. 1.
On April Fool's Day, we play lots of tricks on our teachers. Things like we put cushions underneath the cushion on their chair, and when they sit on it, it makes a rude noise. We also let off stink bombs in the classroom and put cups of water on top of the door so that when the teacher walks in, all the water falls on her head.
2.
On April the 1st, my son came home from school with a note in his homework book from his teacher saying that he'd been very naughty at school and that I was to go in and see them the next morning. I was very cross with my son until he started laughing, and then he said, "April Fool!"
3.
I did a really cruel one. A friend of mine was waiting to hear about a job, and she'd been waiting for weeks, and then I noticed that April Fool's Day was coming up, and so on about 11 o'clock in the morning, I phoned her up, and I pretended to be American because this job was an American, a small part in an American movie that she was doing, and I pretended to be one of the producers, and I offered her the part, and she was just so excited. She completely fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And then at the very end of the conversation, after she was talking about money and how much she'd get paid, I just said, "Oh, and by the way, April Fool!"
Day 10, May the 1st.
May 1st is traditionally an opportunity for workers to express their grievances. Some people believe that it all began in Australia in 1856 with a series of annual strikes. A more likely origin took place 30 years later in 1886 when an American Federation of Labor called for nationwide strikes and demonstrations for an 8-hour day. On May 1st, the police opened fire on a crowd of demonstrators in the city of Milwaukee. 9 people were killed. 2 days later in Chicago, police killed 6 demonstrators at a factory in Chicago, though 8 of their own men were subsequently killed in the protests which followed. In July 1889, as part of centenary celebrations of the French Revolution, an International Labor Congress meeting in Paris called for an International Day of demonstrations in support of the 8-hour day on May 1st, 1890. And on that date, the world celebrated its first global labor holiday.
Day 11, Buddha's birthday. Listening 1. Day 11, listening 2.
There was this butcher, and he had to kill a sheep. But before he killed it, he had a few other jobs to do. When he came back, he found that his knife had disappeared. Where had it gone? He looked everywhere for it. He said to himself, "I'm sure the knife was here. No one is here. The only thing here is the sheep. It must have been her." So he lifted up the sheep, and there, under the ground, was buried the knife, and the sheep had been sleeping on top. And the butcher thought to himself, "What an intelligent animal. She knew I was going to kill her. What a big sinner I am. I kill sheep every day. I'd rather kill myself." So he throws himself off the top of the mountain, and he flies away. On the side of the mountain there's a yogi who sees the butcher flying, and he says to himself, "What's this? Every day this man kills sheep, and look, he's flying now. I've been here on the mountainside for years, meditating and meditating. If he can fly, then why can't I?" So he throws himself off and goes splat, straight down to the ground. Dead.
Day 12, Children's Day. 1.
I think they should be able to have breakfast in bed to start the day, and they should be able to select the programs on the television that they would like to watch, and should be able to demand one chore from each of the parents within reason. I don't think they should be able to select their food, because then they would just make pigs of themselves.
2.
Children should definitely not have to go to school on that day. Presents would be in order if they gave children gifts, and maybe a card for being good throughout the rest of the year.
3.
Well, Children's Day, I think it'd be an amazing thing if it actually happened. There definitely should be no school. They should be bought sweets, everything. Presents, they should be given money, everything. Television should be just taken over by kids' programs, kids' films. Cinemas should be free. There should be fairs opened, and I think parents should not be allowed to tell their children off on that particular day.
4.
What I would do if there was a Children's Day was I would basically just run free, because I would just go places without having to check in with my parents or without them supervising me or asking if I can go someplace. Just go.
5.
I'd have a party. A huge party with all my friends. And my party all day and all night.
Day 13, Father's Day. Listening 1. 1.
Father's Day in the U.S. came about similar to Mother's Day, and it's a day set aside for everyone's father to honor them and give thanks, and usually give small little gifts or cards to your father. And how it came about is a woman wanted to honor her father, who was a Civil War veteran who had to raise 6 kids on his own because his wife was dead. It takes place on the 3rd Sunday of June, and that's Father's Day, and usually around 100 million Father's Day cards are sent annually in the U.S., which is 50 million less than on Mother's Day.
2.
Yes, we celebrate Father's Day on the 19th of March, and it's a very important holiday because as St. Joseph was the father of Christ, we celebrate the Father's Day and give presents to our fathers, and also to people whose name is Joseph, and also Josephine if it's a woman, and give cards to all these people, and also all the family get together to celebrate the date of the father.
Day 13, listening to.
I know that in Sweden, for example, fathers are actively encouraged to spend time with their new children. They're paid to take time off work in order to spend, months at a time.
Who pays for it?
The government. The government.
Oh, right.
And I know the same is true in France.
But they're trying to do it more and more here, where they are. Some companies are trying to be kind of daddy friendly and giving paternity leave, but it's completely at the discretion of the company. So I think maybe here the company must pay for it.
Yeah.
But it's a shame, because also the mum needs the daddy there.
That's right. Yeah. Well, in an ideal world, yes, great. It would be lovely if you had the father there. But I don't think it works in it obviously it differs from country to country. The different cultural. Think of somewhere like Greece, where I've spent some time, and the father's role is that of going out and working to provide for the family, and the mother is essentially the one that brings the children
Well, I think apart from the...
They don't wash up.
No, certainly not.
They come home, where's my food?
Yeah, apart from the, a couple of countries, really, like Germany, the Scandinavian countries, and maybe America slightly now. Everywhere else is exactly as you say. I mean, it's a terribly traditional way of looking at the
It's actually quite a sexist way of looking at it.
And short-sighted, I think, too.
Yeah.
Well, how long has it been like this, though? The new father thing that you say. I mean, do you imagine that in Scandinavia that's been going on for more than 20 years?
Well, the reason I mention that it's short-sighted is that obviously it's countries who are thinking about the long-term future of their countries and thinking about the education of their children and the kind of society that they want their kids to live in.
Yeah, well, society is changing now. I mean, it has to change because women are more and more going out to work, not just out of necessity, but a lot of the time from choice. So it's got to be a two-way job for bringing up children.
Day 14, summer solstice. Nearly all early civilizations worshipped the sun. For example, the inhabitants of Mesopotamia, the Egyptians, Romans, Norsemen, and the Mayans, Aztecs, and Incas. In fact, some named their days of the week after the planets. They also recognized that the constellations of the zodiac formed a broad band that seemed to be the annual pathway of the sun. From this, they derived all kinds of horoscopes. What they couldn't have calculated was just how heavy the sun is, about 300,000 times heavier than the Earth. The sun's vast temperature, about 5,500 degrees centigrade at the surface and 15 million in the nucleus, would seem to be higher than could ever be reached on Earth. But back in 1994, at a fusion test reactor in the USA, a temperature of 510 million degrees was achieved. Although the sun is some 150 million kilometers from the Earth, it is responsible for nearly everything that goes on the Earth, as a life giver to animal and plant life through photosynthesis, and as an energy supplier through solar, hydroelectric, oil and coal power. However, it is the moon which is principally responsible for tidal forces, and energy from the Earth's interior causes geysers, hot springs, volcanoes and earthquakes. Day 15, Independence Day. Listening 1.
Argentina in 1816 was the first country in South America to gain independence from the Spanish, and was followed 2 years later by Chile. But of course the Portuguese had the biggest single territory, Brazil, which was made independent in 1822. Uruguay, which was part of Brazil, only had to wait another 3 years before being granted independence by the Brazilians. European countries had many colonies and protectorates in North Africa and the Middle East. Syria was one of the first to gain independence from the French in 1946, then Tunisia in 1956, and Algeria in 1962. Italy too had colonies in the same region. For example, Libya, which became a kingdom in 1951, and then a republic in 1969. Iraq was a British protectorate for 12 years before becoming an independent monarchy in 1932, though later becoming a republic in 1958.
Day 15. Listening to 1.
July 4th happens to be America's favorite holiday. It is a time where you can meet with your family. It's a time where you would reunite with loved ones and pretty much have fun all day long. It's a day in America where it's a festival day, so everyone normally spends time all day long with their family doing things. It's a time where you would meet together and you would barbecue, eat a lot of food, drink a lot of beverages, and play a lot of sporting events. If you're older and you're into sporting events, you would normally go to a baseball game at the stadium, and you would spend all day long there. After the game, there are fireworks, of course, that at the conclusion of the game, and you spend time with your friends and loved ones watching the fireworks.
2.
What I usually do for 4th of July, since it was the day when the United States became a whole country, we usually get together with our other family members, and they usually have the American flag blowing, and then of course we shoot out fireworks and have a little, we usually have a barbecue since it's in the summer, and we just spend it with the family.
Day 15. Listening 3.
The British Empire was the biggest of the European empires. In the 1920s and 30s, Britain had made part of its empire into a commonwealth. Huge countries like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand had quite small populations dominated by white settlers. They were allowed to rule themselves as independent countries, but with the King of England as the head of state. India was the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. It was the richest colony, with an enormous population, far greater than that of Britain. The Indian people wanted to rule themselves, but Britain refused to treat them like Canada or Australia. Between the two world wars, Mahatma Gandhi became the leader of the Indian independence movement. He wanted to use non-violent methods to force the British to grant India independence. He organized strikes and huge protest meetings, as well as campaigns to boycott British goods and to stop paying taxes. During the Second World War, the Japanese threatened to capture India. The Indian Congress Party refused to support Britain in the war, so the British promised them independence once the war was over if they would join in the war against Japan. In 1947, Britain gave up control of India. However, the Hindus and Muslims wanted to rule themselves, and so two separate countries were formed, India and Pakistan. There were terrible riots which left as many as 1 million dead and led to 10 million people becoming refugees.
Day 16. Diwali. 1.
Hindus worship many hundreds of gods, which represent different aspects of Brahman, but the three most important gods are Brahma the creator, Vishnu the protector, and Shiva the destroyer. Shiva is also called the Lord of the Dance because he is often shown dancing. Dance is a way of showing the energy flowing through the world, which is responsible for life and death, good and evil. Shiva's 4 hands symbolize his power over these, but he is not a cruel god. The old needs to be destroyed to make way for the new.
2.
Hindus regard all living creatures as sacred, mammals, fishes, birds, and more. The cow symbolically represents all other creatures to the Hindu. The cow is a good example to man because it is so giving. It gives and gives and gives, like the soul, and takes only grass and grain. In a society with no other domestic animals, we could still survive if we only had the cow.
3.
Not only women, but also Hindu men wear the dot on the forehead. It indicates their third eye, It also helps to identify a Hindu among members of other religions. If you think about it, Sikhs wear turbans, Muslim women often wear a veil, Christians wear crosses. In many cases, the dot is just like a beauty mark, which often complements the colour of a lady's sari.
4.
This is a very there is an underlying Hindu rule called ahimsa, which means refraining from injuring physically or mentally any living creature. This is because the same spirit that unites us all, Brahman, is in us all, so of course not eating meat is a natural consequence. However, there are no commandments, and it's up to Hindus themselves what they put in their body. In fact, today, only about 20 to 30% of Hindus are vegetarians.
Day 17, Reunification Day.
And had life really been so bad during the communist period?
Communist isn't really the right word. In fact, all those countries that we in the West call communist actually called themselves socialist. In fact, if you think about it, the USSR stood for Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, not Communist Republics. But to go back to your question, no, it hadn't been so bad. They'd had housing provided for all, with rents fixed at 1939 prices. There were very few homeless people, no beggars on the street like there are now. They had good childcare facilities, which incidentally meant that there were a lot of jobs for women. They had a good education system, some would say better than they've got now.
Sounds like a utopia.
But of course there's the downside too. There was the dreaded Stasi, the state security police with its network of informers, which made up nearly a third of the population, it was rumoured. Children were encouraged to look into their neighbours' windows to see what they were watching on TV, because they weren't allowed to watch any Western movies. And next morning at school the teacher would say, "What did your mummy and daddy watch last night?"
Sounds terrible. No freedom at all.
Yes, but you could argue, what has freedom of choice brought them? Organised crime, beggars, drugs.
I've heard some East Germans complain that rather than reunification with West Germany, what they actually experienced was a takeover.
I think to some extent that's true. There was certainly a tendency, and not just on the Western side, to think that the West is the best, so to speak. That is the end of Side 2. The Book of Days by Adrian Walwork. Published by Cambridge University Press, 1999. This recording is copyright. Cassette 2, Side 1. Day 18, Teacher's Day. Listening 1. 1.
Teachers are better than books.
2.
Younger teachers are generally better than older teachers.
3.
Teachers cannot and should not be friends with their pupils.
4.
Children learn more from each other than from their teachers.
5.
Teachers generally don't give their pupils enough homework.
6.
Primary school teachers are often better than secondary school teachers.
7.
Teachers should never expose their political ideas.
8.
Most teachers don't make their subjects interesting enough.
9.
Strict teachers are generally the best.
10.
Teachers work more than most other professions and for a lot less money.
Day 18, Listening 2. 1.
I think 18, because then, you know, you're an adult by the time you leave, and you've got lots of years to learn things.
2.
Well, obviously, when you're younger, you learn a lot from being at home and from your family and television or the young children's programs.
3.
I think it's up to you, isn't it? I mean, everybody has totally individual tastes.
4.
I think it should be up to the individual to decide what they want to do, because obviously everyone wants different careers and wants to study different things.
5.
Obviously, there's not so many distractions if boys and girls are kept separately, but then, you know, you shouldn't really be separate because that's just a fact of life, isn't it?
6.
I really don't know. I mean, I wasn't alive 20 years ago, so...
7.
Now, I think they'll be the best of your years of your life because once you leave school, everything changes and you have so much more to worry about.
Day 19. Columbus Day. 1.
Maize was discovered by Columbus, but was introduced to Europe by Cortez.
2.
Potatoes were originally cultivated by the Incas and were discovered in Peru by Pizarro, who brought them to Europe in 1534. The English naval man Sir Walter Raleigh discovered them in Virginia 50 years after Pizarro.
3.
Rubber was only used on a large scale in Europe in the 19th century. The earliest reference to rubber by a European was in 1530 to describe an Aztec bull game.
4.
Haitian Indians used to roll dried tobacco leaves into a pipe. A variation of this habit was introduced into Europe by the Spanish in the early 16th century.
5.
The first book to be printed was in Korea in 704. Europe had to wait until 1451. Paper money was printed in Persia in 1014.
6.
The first horseshoes were made in around 900.
7.
Coffee was first domesticated in northeast Africa and was already being drunk over 2,000 years ago.
8.
Some of the first clocks were the sundials used by the ancient Egyptians and the water clocks by the Greeks and Romans. The first mechanical clock in Europe was produced in 1283.
Day 20. United Nations Day.
On 25th of June, 1945, 51 countries met in San Francisco to sign the Charter of the United Nations. Their main aim was to make sure that never again so many lives would be lost in war. In fact, around 10 million soldiers had died in the First World War and 55 million in the Second. The original 51 members have now become 185, and each state has one vote, no matter how small they are. The UN doesn't have its own army. Instead, member states voluntarily supply troops and personnel. The first peacekeeping force was used in 1950, during the crisis in Korea. Since then, the UN has been involved in about 40 peace missions and has helped more than 30 million refugees. About 1,300 UN peacekeepers have died on duty. Less than 3% were Americans. But keeping the peace is only a small part of the United Nations work. About 80% of their effort is devoted to helping countries to learn how to help themselves. For instance, the UN agency responsible for education, science, and culture is called UNESCO. It has led a campaign to help people in poorer countries to read and write. In 1970, only 10% of Ethiopians could read and write. Now the figure is over 70%. Originally, only 1,500 people worked for the UN. Now there are 51,000 employees all around the world.
Day 21. Halloween. And since we're on the subject of Halloween, Claire, tell me, how do the Americans celebrate Halloween? Is it similar?
Oh, it's great. It's the best holiday. You go and you dress up in whatever kind of costume you want to, anything from a ghost to, I don't know, someone from Star Wars if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
And then you run around to people's houses and you ask them for money. Money? No, for candy. Sorry. I don't know if anyone asks for money. No, you definitely ask for candy.
Right.
And you say trick or treat, which you probably know about.
Trick or
Yeah,
treat.
it's the same here.
Yeah.
We do the same thing.
Do they ask for money here? I mean, sweets?
They ask for sweets, but a lot of people don't have treats to give them, so sometimes they feel guilty and so they give them money instead of nothing.
Oh, maybe that's where I got the money thing from.
Right. Oh, well, that sounds...
Oh, and the trick is often they put, for some reason, you take toilet paper and you put it all in the trees in their garden. Very obnoxious.
Really?
It's very hard to get out. Yeah.
We're not so bold over here. I don't think we do such bad things. If you get something really bad, it's like having flour chucked to your front door or something. Really not so bad like that.
That's really nice. And what about the pumpkin phenomenon?
Oh,
they cut these pumpkins up in a kind of weird way?
Do they do that here?
Do they do?
Yeah,
that's great.
I still do that now.
Yeah.
Do you? You get the pumpkin and then you carve out the inside and you make a
You
face.
put it in your window.
Yeah.
So
and you
then
put a candle
at
in.
night you can all see all the pumpkins with the candles in the windows.
Spooky.
Nice though, fun.
Day 22. Day of the Dead. 1.
Quartin dogo wana bila quartin dogo uyen yoke boro gwero ki kon wara chin ko cham chamitil en dunia dong duo megini duchu chamu en.
2.
In my youth, I went south in my dreams. I went south. There, I watched them hunt. I watched them hunt the buffalo, and in my heart, I hunted with them. Now they are gone. The buffalo have left, ashamed that we had let them die, mercilessly, at the hands of the white hunters.
3. Let no one say the past is dead. The past is all about us and within. Haunted by tribal memories, I know this little now, this accidental present, is not the all of me, whose long making is so much of the past. 1,000 campfires in the forest are in my blood. Let none tell me the past is wholly gone. Now is so small a part of time, so small a part of all the race years that have moulded me. 4.
Indian. We are North Americans, he said, and made me feel ashamed that I was not wearing beads at my throat, small proud flowers growing there, or leather serene stump, handsome-faced, color of earth rose, quietly telling me that I am Indian now, and ending all the identity fears.
Day 23. Guy Fawkes Night. 1.
At that time, the Houses of Parliament had 2 floors. The Lords met on the upper floor. Below were some old kitchens. In May 1604, one of the conspirators managed to rent the house next door to the kitchen area. In December, they began tunnelling from the house into the Parliament buildings. The stone was very thick, and they made little progress.
2.
Guy Fawkes was found, and the search party uncovered the gunpowder under a pile of wood. Fawkes was arrested, and later the rest of the conspirators too. They were hung, drawn and quartered, and their bodies were thrown onto bonfires. November the 5th was then officially celebrated as a day of thanksgiving for 250 years.
3.
In 1604, Robert Catesby decided that assassinating James I was not enough. The whole Protestant government needed to be eliminated. He discussed his plans with 5 other Catholic conspirators, including a certain Guido Fawkes, in an old lodging house near an inn.
4.
The conspirators waited for the opening of a new parliament, but one of them realised that the massive explosion might kill some ex-Catholic lords who had been forced to become Protestants. So, an anonymous letter was sent to one of these lords warning him of the plot. The letter was given to the Prime Minister, who ordered a search to be made.
5.
Today, children in Britain go around begging for a penny for the guy to buy money for fireworks. They then build enormous bonfires, burn effigies of Guy Fawkes, and watch fantastic firework displays.
6.
While they were tunnelling one day, Guy Fawkes discovered that coal was being removed from a cellar directly under where many of the lords often sat. The conspirators quickly transferred 36 barrels of gunpowder into the cellar.
Now listen to the story in the correct order. In 1604, Robert Catesby decided that assassinating James I was not enough. The whole Protestant government needed to be eliminated. He discussed his plans with 5 other Catholic conspirators, including a certain Guido Fawkes, in an old lodging house near an inn. At that time, the Houses of Parliament had 2 floors. The Lords met on the upper floor. Below were some old kitchens. In May 1604, one of the conspirators managed to rent the house next door to the kitchen area. In December, they began tunnelling from the house into the Parliament buildings. The stone was very thick, and they made little progress. While they were tunnelling one day, Guy Fawkes discovered that coal was being removed from a cellar directly under where many of the lords often sat. The conspirators quickly transferred 36 barrels of gunpowder into the cellar. The conspirators waited for the opening of a new parliament. But one of them realized that the massive explosion might kill some ex-Catholic lords who had been forced to become Protestants. So an anonymous letter was sent to one of these lords warning him of the plot. The letter was given to the Prime Minister, who ordered a search to be made. Guy Fawkes was found, and the search party uncovered the gunpowder under a pile of wood. Fawkes was arrested, and later the rest of the conspirators too. They were hung, drawn and quartered, and their bodies were thrown onto bonfires. November the 5th was then officially celebrated as a day of thanksgiving for 250 years. Today, children in Britain go around begging for a penny for the guy to buy money for fireworks. They then build enormous bonfires, burn effigies of Guy Fawkes, and watch fantastic firework displays. Day 24, Remembrance Day. Listening 1.
November the 11th was first proclaimed Armistice Day in 1919 to celebrate the signing in 1918 at 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month of the armistice that brought the First World War to an end. It then changed its name to Remembrance Day in Britain and Canada, where people raise money by selling poppies to help war veterans and amputees. In France, the President of the Republic makes a speech on television, and the veterans make little sticks with the French flag to sell in the streets. The French also celebrate May the 8th, which was the last day of the Second World War. In Britain, on the second Sunday of November, various services are held throughout the country, the most important being at the Cenotaph in Whitehall, London. The services include a 2-minute silence. The King or Queen places a wreath on the tomb of the unknown warrior, who is a representative of all who died. In the United States, Armistice Day was observed until 1954, when President Eisenhower signed an act of Congress to honor veterans on the 11th day of November each year, a day dedicated to world peace. And since then in the US, the day has been known as Veterans Day.
Day 24, Listening 2. 1.
There's early retirements for 15 years. There's very few other things that you could work at just for 15 years and be able to retire. Right? Just and the pride of serving. Somebody's got to do it. Where would any country be without some type of a military force?
Right.
And most people that do that take pride in serving their country.
2.
What some people would consider bad are part of what some people would consider the challenge, such as sleep deprivation. When you're working in the field, you get very tired at times, especially during combat arms. You don't have regular sleep or regular food. There's a lot of pressure.
3.
With the Uniform Code of Military Justice and the authority that gives commanders to direct you to do things whether you want to do them or not. You're educated as a private and what the consequences will be if you choose not to follow an order. Usually in time of peace you can go to jail for a considerable amount of time. In time of war you could be shot.
4.
Well, the majority of people are attracted by the adventure, travel, and the challenge. And we do have a lot of people who join because of the family connection. Fathers, brothers, uncles, even grandfathers who've been in the services.
5.
And when you go from that type of a life, 24 hours, 7 day a week, with the threat of landmines or being shot at, always being on your toes kind of thing, and then go back to your regular home life, it's a culture shock.
6. They're not allowed at present to join what we call combat arms, which is infantry, the Royal Armour Corps, and some branches of the Royal Engineers, because of the type of work that they're expected to do. It's not considered morally correct in Britain at present for them to be directly involved in war, though the Israeli army and the Danish army are both doing it.
7.
You spend a lot of time away from your families, and occasionally you have language problems.
Day 24, Listening 3. Conscious by Wilfred Owen. His fingers wake and flutter. Up the bed, his eyes come open with a pull of will, helped by the yellow mayflowers by his head. The blind cord drawls across the window sill. What a smooth floor the ward has. What a rug. Who's that talking out of sight? Why are they laughing? What's inside that jug? Nurse? Doctor? Yes, all right, all right. But sudden evening muddles all the air. There seems to be no time to want a drink of water. Nurse looks so far away, and here and there music and roses burst through crimson slaughter. He can't remember where he saw blue sky. More blankets. Cold. He's cold, and yet so hot. And there's no light to see the voices by. There is not time to ask, he knows not what. Day 25. Thanksgiving. Listening 1. 1.
Fortunately, the first year's harvest was good. The Pilgrims wanted to thank both God and also the Indians. So the governor declared a feast and invited the Indians to join in. About 90 Indians brought along fish, deer meat, turkey, and pumpkin. The Indians taught the Pilgrims how to crush corn and make it into hot cornmeal bread. They feasted with the English settlers for 3 days.
2.
In 1620, a group of English people who were unhappy with the way the Church of England was organized set sail from Plymouth on a ship called the Mayflower. They wanted to found a new church in America.
3.
After 6 weeks at sea, the Pilgrims landed at what is now Plymouth Rock, Massachusetts, in 1620. They had a hard winter, and nearly half of them died, but the local Indians provided seeds for the corn, which the Europeans had never seen before. They also helped the English settlers to hunt and fish.
4.
Today, Americans celebrate this happy harvest festival on the 4th Thursday of November, with much the same food as had been eaten at the first Thanksgiving.
5.
The next year, no Thanksgiving celebrations were held, and it didn't become an annual event until the 1780s. It was made a national holiday in 1863 by President Abraham Lincoln.
Now listen to the story of Thanksgiving in the correct order.
In 1620, a group of English people who were unhappy with the way the Church of England was organized set sail from Plymouth on a ship called the Mayflower. They wanted to found a new church in America. After 6 weeks at sea, the Pilgrims landed at what is now Plymouth Rock, Massachusetts, in 1620. They had a hard winter, and nearly half of them died. But the local Indians provided seeds for the corn, which the Europeans had never seen before. They also helped the English settlers to hunt and fish. Fortunately, the first year's harvest was good. The Pilgrims wanted to thank both God and also the Indians, so the governor declared a feast and invited the Indians to join in. Brought along fish, deer meat, turkey, cornmeal bread. They feasted with the English settlers for 3 days. The next year, no Thanksgiving celebrations were held, and it didn't become an annual event until the 1780s. It was made a national holiday in 1863 in Abraham Lincoln. Today, Americans celebrate this happy holiday at the first Thanksgiving.
Day 25, Listening 2.
Good evening, and welcome to One World for a special Thanksgiving program. Later in the evening, we'll be hearing from Wayne Sharp up in Plymouth Rock. But now, I'd like to introduce Lynn Craig, a high school history teacher whose students today have been learning a slightly different version of the traditional Thanksgiving story. Lynn?
Thank you, Jeff. I think that what we've been handed down over the generations is the myth of Thanksgiving. What we'd like Thanksgiving to be, rather than the historical facts of it all, which have almost become irrelevant, or at least very much distorted.
For political purposes?
Yes, I think we can draw parallels with pretty much any place where white people have overrun the native inhabitants. We need to distort our history to justify what happened. Politicians needed to appeal to the sense of a melting pot, and of an ideal time when the whites and indigenous people lived happily together.
But what about those first pilgrims?
Well, they've been romanticized out of all proportion. I mean, when the Puritans actually gained power in England, that was really the end of music, dance, and theater. For a while, at least. They even banned Christmas. And the ones that left for America were really out to build their own holy kingdom.
And the natives they found kind of represented the devil?
Mm-hmm. That's it exactly. The Pilgrims were Satan hunters. They were the chosen elect. It wasn't long before they were telling their Indian neighbors that their religion and customs were wrong, and they used anything in their power to achieve their ends. Torture, deception, war. Some would even say genocide.
So, why were the Wampanoag Indians invited to the Thanksgiving?
The main reason was to get an agreement out of them, which would secure the rights of the Pilgrims to the plantations around Plymouth. And Mather the Elder actually thanked God for sending the plague of smallpox that wiped out many of Wampanoag Indians, who'd actually been the only reason why the Pilgrims had a harvest to celebrate in the first place, as they'd been the ones that had shown them how to cultivate the land.
The Wampanoag even brought most of the food, didn't they? Mm-hmm. Or is that part of the myth, too?
Well, apparently they did. But tonight, all around the states, people are going to be sitting down to their Thanksgiving meals, blissfully unaware of the true meaning of that first Thanksgiving.
Day 26, Winter Solstice.
At the same period as the Romans were honouring their god of agriculture at the festival of Saturnalia, the Persians were celebrating their sun god Mithras. The parallels between the lives of Mithras and Christ are remarkable. Mithras too was born of a virgin and, like Christ, was resurrected. The main elements of his faith were fraternity and moral purity, with the hope of everlasting life. The most symbolic and unifying elements were the celebrations of the rebirth of the sun, Sol Invictus, which coincided very nicely with the birth of the Son of God. The early Christians didn't celebrate Christ's birthday, as birthdays themselves were associated with pagan practices. Although tradition says that people began celebrating Christmas in the year 98, the date of December the 25th as the official birthday of Christ was only decided in 350 by the Bishop of Rome, Julius I. The choice of December the 25th was designed to try and quash the pagan celebrations, though it took several centuries to do this. Nobody actually knows when Christ was born, and some scholars deny he even existed. A specialist in Oriental Studies from Manchester University once claimed that Jesus was the code name for a secret cult of the sacred mushroom. The New Testament is itself full of contradictions. According to Matthew, it is Joseph who receives news of Jesus' coming birth in a dream, whereas Luke says that Mary got the news directly from the angel Gabriel. Luke says that Mary and Joseph had to travel from their home in Nazareth to Bethlehem for the Roman census. But in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus' parents already lived in Bethlehem and only had to leave to escape King Herod's edict on the killing of children.
Cassette 2, Side 2. Day 27, Christmas. Listening 1.
We used to go to my grandparents for Christmas, and they lived in a village which didn't have electricity, and there was this big wood stove. Now, it was 80 degrees during the day, so after midnight service, we'd come home, put the turkey in, and also a couple of legs of lamb. We would have done the ham earlier. Then, Christmas Day itself, we used to eat outside. The Christmas tree was always on the veranda. I mean, it was all lit up, tinsel and everything, robins everywhere, and fairy lights, but it was outside on the veranda. And we would have about 14 to 20 people, but we always ate outside, and we had a complete mixture. We always had hot turkey, hot lamb, but not hot vegetables, no. Well, then we had huge big bowls of salad, fresh fruit salad, but we also had hot Christmas pudding and brandy butter and custard. I mean, it was the most ridiculous menu. Then, well, we couldn't swim straight after that, but generally, later on in the afternoon, we'd go down to the lake and have a bit of a swim, walk down, walk off the dinner a bit. And, of course, I once got terribly sunburnt at Christmas. I mean, I just forgot and went to sleep.
Day 27, listening 2. 1.
On the day after Christmas, collection boxes in churches used to be opened, and the money that had been collected was given to the poor. It was also a tradition on this day for working people and servants to break open their tip boxes. These were boxes that contained money that rich people had given them throughout the year.
2.
Germans brought the Christmas tree both to Britain via the royal family and to the United States via immigrants. But the habit of decorating trees goes back to the Romans and their festival of Saturnalia.
3.
Christmas cards are an English invention, and the first one was published in 1843. About 1,000 million are sent every year in Britain.
4.
Christmas is celebrated in most countries of the world, even where there are only small Christian communities such as Nigeria, Iran, Iraq, India, Japan and China. But even non-Christians celebrate it as a time of year for giving gifts and generally having a good time.
5.
The custom of exchanging gifts at this time of year was already common well before the birth of Christ.
Day 27, listening 3.
It's called Sinterklaas, and it's celebrated on December the 5th. And it's a nice tall man, all in a red dress, and he comes on a big boat with his black helpers. And they do all acrobatic stunts and stuff, and they walk around with these big Uten bags. And the thing is, the children are all really scared of Sinterklaas, because if you're bad, then he will take you back to Spain.
To Spain?
Yes, that's where he comes from. And then for the rest of the year, you have to pick oranges for him. So if you're good, you get sweets. And if you're bad, he'll take you back in the bag, or he gives you, he'll spank your bum with the end of a broom. They call it the roux. So it's, you have to write poems and sing songs in front of the fireplace. And you have to put a wooden shoe with a carrot and straw, because he comes also on his white horse and he rides over top of the roofs. And so in the evening you have to sing really loud and ask him to come by your house and tell him that you've been a good girl or a good boy. And so you leave that for him, and you also leave cookies for him and his helpers. And then in the morning, the carrot is gone, the cookies are gone, and you find a gift, if you've been a good girl or a good boy.
Day 28, birthdays. Listening 1. 1.
My name is Anne Ray. I was born on the 29th of May 1952 in Whitehaven in Cumbria. My star sign is Gemini, which is the twin sign. Typically Geminis are known for starting things but not finishing them. I don't think this is typical of me, because although I do like to start lots of things and I have lots of things going on, I do tend to finish whatever I start.
2.
My name is Timothy Mitchell. I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, and of course in the United States, on August 12th, 1971. My zodiac sign, or my star sign, would be Leo, and some of the characteristics of Leo would be, a Leo would be a born leader. I don't know if I'm a born leader, but I'm not really a follower. As far as more characteristics, pride and dignity, I think I have, very much so. I'm very much prideful about what I do as far as work and everyday going-ons in my life.
3.
My name is Jean Quick. I was born in Manchester on November the 19th, 1926. I'm a Scorpio. I'm a typical Scorpio because I say what I think and I'm exceedingly sociable.
4.
My name is Gillian Brogden. I was born in Cambridge on the 1st of May 1954. My zodiac sign is Taurus, and although I don't particularly believe in horoscopes, some of the things are quite relevant to me, particularly liking good food, because I'm a cook, so I do like good food. And also I'm attached to family and friends, which is also quite relevant.
5.
My name is Anna Southern. I was born on the 25th of September 1972. I'm from Rochdale in Lancashire. My star sign is Libra. They say that Librans are very indecisive, but I'm not really into horoscopes, so I don't know whether I believe that.
Day 28, listening 2. Welcome to this special birthday edition of One World. Yes, folks, we've been on the air for exactly 1 year now, and we thought it would be a nice idea to have a special program dedicated to birthday celebrations around the world. With us in the studio tonight, we have Shaheen Hack and Pat Kane, who has a weekly column on birthdays in the Toronto Daily Star.
Oh, hi. Good evening. How's it going?
All right. Shaheen, perhaps we could begin with you. How are birthdays celebrated in India?
Well, I think perhaps we're all assuming that everyone in the world celebrates their birthday. This just isn't the case. Low-income families in India, for instance, simply can't afford any festivities, and most Muslims don't celebrate their birthdays.
I think Shaheen has raised an interesting point here. The Christian Church, too, was actively against celebrating birthdays. And in any case, most people until a couple hundred years ago, they couldn't even read and wouldn't even been able to spot their birthday on a calendar anyway.
Of course, some Muslims do celebrate their birthdays in Egypt, Turkey, and Indonesia, for example. The rich people invite friends and families around, but not in the small villages.
Here in England, your 21st is the big one. Is that true of other countries too?
Well, actually, the British seem to be fairly unique on that one. I mean, in most of the West, 18 is the most important birthday. In Finland, just to name one typical example, 18 is the age when you can vote, or buy wines, drive a car, and so on. But in Japan, I think you have to wait until you're 20 before you can smoke or drink.
Yeah, I know in Senegal, which is another predominantly Muslim country, girls get to vote at 16 and boys at 18. And in Bangladesh, girls at 18 and boys at 21.
That's interesting. I mean, is that typical that around the world girls are considered to be more mature than boys?
Yes, I think it is. And there are some countries, particularly in South America, which only have a big party for the girls. In Mexico and Argentina, for example, they have enormous parties for 15-year-old girls.
As a kind of coming out into society?
Yes. It's to celebrate when you become a woman.
Right.
You have a really big party, your parents buy you a really nice dress, and invite all the families and your friends. All the neighbors give you presents. And in some places the partying goes on for days, even weeks, I've been told.
But in Norway they have a great party for anyone who's not married by the time they're 30. It's kind of embarrassing. I mean, you get pepper thrown at you.
Pepper? Why pepper?
I'm not really sure.
So does that mean that on your 29th birthday you can start thinking, God, I better get married?
Well, I'm not sure how seriously they take it.
Well, in England we have quite big parties for your 40th, 50th, 60th and so on.
Well, in Japan your 88th is considered to be the luckiest birthday. 8 is a very lucky number in Japan.
Right. Day 28, listening 3. 1.
Right, your parents get to tell you what to do, and you don't have as much, and you're not allowed to do as much things as your parents are. Like, you can't drive cars, and you can't always go places that you want to go.
2.
I don't think there's anything greater than being 16, because when you're 15, it's cheaper on the buses and into the cinemas and everything, and all the things you can't do at 15, you still can't do at 16. But when you're 16, the price for the bus doubles and for the train and into cinemas, you don't get a discount anymore. So, and you can't drive a car until you're 17, and you can't drink until you're 18, so there's nothing really very good about being 16.
3.
The things that I like about being 20, well, I suppose I can drink and I can smoke and I can drive, not all at once, of course. I think it's a good age, but if I was in America, you can't drink or do a lot of things until you're 21. But so I'm glad that I live in England.
4.
I'm 7 years old. The bad things are that I can't stay up late. I can't watch television up late. My daddy makes me read. And the good things are that I can play and I don't have to work and mean jobs.
Day 28, listening 4.
בנימין זאב יטרף, בבוקר יאכל עד, ולערב יחלק שלל. כל אלה שבטי ישראל 12, וזאת אשר דיבר להם אביהם, ויברך אותם. איש אשר כברכתו ברך אותם, ויצב אותם, ויאמר להם אני נאסף אל עמי.
Day 28, listening 5. 1.
It's tradition that when you're 13 years old you reach the bar mitzvah age, which traditionally means that you reach the age of being a man, and you have to go to shul on that day, and you have to recite the Sedra, which you've already prepared. You read the Sedra. It's especially, you're told about a year before which Sedra you have, so you're given time to prepare it, and you prepare it with your rabbi. And in my case, I prepared it with my father, because that was what he liked to do.
2.
The Sedra is the reading of the Torah, and it's split up into the 5 books of the Torah.
3.
It's mainly for the boys, but over the last century they've introduced something called a bat chayil, which is for the girls, and they say that when they reach the age of 12, because they're supposed to be more mature than boys, then the same thing happens.
4.
They say it's because you turn into a man. This is what happens, and it's every Jewish boy does it.
5.
Told that after you've done it, every good deed that you did before the age of 13 goes to your father, and if you do something bad, then it goes on your father's record, so that when he dies and goes to heaven, then that's on his record. But now that you're 13, you hold your own sins, so that and they say a special blessing after the call up, and the father frees you of him, basically saying that now you have to hold your own sins and do your own deeds.
6.
Usually you have a party afterwards on the Sunday night or the Saturday night, and something beforehand for the family and friends, and you get presents then.
Day 29, Wedding Day, listening 1.
With the royal wedding tomorrow, One World dedicates tonight's programme to a discussion of wedding ceremonies around the world. I'd like to welcome back Shaheen Hack.
Thank you, Sarah.
But let's begin with our other guest, Nate Hancock.
Hi.
Nate, you've just got a book out on weddings called Holy Wedlock.
Yes, actually, the lock in wedlock has nothing to do with the prison effect of marriage at all. Lock should really be lack, which means present or gift, which is obviously connected to the dowry system of our ancestors.
Shaheen, do dowries still exist in India?
Yes, they do. In fact, many Indian families spend between 20 and 50% of their savings on the wedding ceremony, which includes the dowry that the woman's family gives to the man.
That sounds an incredible lot.
Well, they invite about 300 or 400 relatives and friends to the wedding.
And are marriages still arranged?
Yes, they are.
Sorry. I just wanted to say that I was talking with a man from Bangladesh who told me that marriages there are arranged, but that you can have a kind of trial period after you get married, between 1 and 6 months, and then get divorced if you're not compatible.
That's interesting. And Bangladesh is a Muslim country, right?
Yes. I think we tend to assume that Muslim countries don't allow divorce, which is just not true. But in any case, the man told me that only about 5% of the marriages don't work out, which if you compare that to the States, where about 50% of marriages end in divorce, that's pretty good.
Shaheen, was your marriage arranged?
No, I'm married to an English guy, so no, it wasn't. But I think there are a lot of misconceptions about arranged marriages. The process is actually the reverse of a typical Western marriage, which begins with the couple madly in love and then often ends in tears. Whereas in India and other countries, the couple obviously don't know each other at all at the beginning and then gradually learn to love each other, genuinely too.
And of course, they have the benefit of a strong economic base, which is one thing less to worry about.
And how are the marriages actually arranged?
Well, back in India, the man's parents generally look around for a suitable girl. Then they find out about her family. Then sometimes the couple meet, but always with a chaperone, and they ask each other a few questions. Then the actual wedding takes place at the girl's house and lasts up to 3 or 4 days.
But do the couple have any choice in the matter?
Of course they do, because it's to everyone's benefit that the marriage works out. But then there are some cases where marriages are forced on people.
Day 29, listening 2. 1.
People used to throw grain or rice at the newlywed couple. This was symbolic of good luck, fertility and abundance.
2.
In primitive times, a future husband often chose a bride from another tribe. He and his men would then go into enemy territory and capture her. He then left his men there to fight the angry relatives. It generally took the enemy a month, the cycle of a moon, to give up looking for the bride. During this time, the husband and his new wife fled and hid in a cave where they would drink a very nutrient honey mixture.
3.
The Romans believed that the vein in the third finger led directly to the heart. Medieval Italians used to buy their brides diamond rings, since in folklore, diamonds were said to be created from the flames of love. As the singer Madonna once said, Italians do it better.
4.
Food has always been an integral part of wedding ceremonies, and there is probably no such thing as the first wedding cake. The Romans used to break a cake made of grain on the bride's head. The seeds represented fertility and abundance.
Day 29, listening 3. Well, it seems like divorce is a growing phenomenon all over, certainly the Western world. I mean, Laurel, it seems to be the most prevalent in the United States, or is that right? It seems to be quite high.
Do you think that's true? I don't know that it's more prevalent than anywhere else, really. I've heard it's about 50%, I think, of marriages end in divorce, and I wouldn't be surprised if in Europe that's not similar. But I think in the States, there's such career pressures that I think people end up hardly ever seeing each other, which is certainly going to lead to, especially if you have two people working, the man and the woman in the relationship working, that's going to be incredibly hard if you never have time to talk to each other, to spend time with each other, and there's always that pressure to move the next step up on the career ladder. I would say, certainly in urban areas, that's a big factor for divorce.
Well, what about you? Do you think, I mean, what about the factors for divorce over here? I mean, would you say it's, do you know many people who've been divorced? You got many friends?
I've got several friends that have, their parents have been divorced, and it was mainly the common reasons that always came out were drinking problems with the father.
Right.
Was often really high, which is quite a main thing in this country anyway, is alcohol.
Right.
When I noticed when going over to the States, there's not as much alcohol around.
That's true.
It's always been a problem here.
Well, at least it's not, you can't go around on the streets so much drinking, but
Exactly.
you can certainly, in the home, you can certainly drink as much as anywhere else in the world, I think.
And that also leads to other things like physical violence often gets and the people, and then that leads to the continual arguments always happens, and the parents get upset with each other, and then they take it out on the children, and the children get wound up in it.
Yeah.
It's just a no-win situation.
Yeah.
I think one thing leads to another, doesn't it? Kind of someone whose parents, the mother was working during the day and in the evening, and the father was working just during the day. When he came home, there was no one there, so there was no communication at all. So the dad would go out drinking, and then the mum come home and he'd be drunk, and it was probably going to end in divorce, I would have thought.
I mean, is it I mean, we look at divorce as being an embarrassing statistic, you know, the high divorce rates, but is it a bad thing if unhappy marriages are made to end? I mean...
Well, I think sometimes it's not the fault of the people involved. I mean, this couple have been together since they were 16, and they stayed together for 25 years, but they lost all their childhood and they wanted to recapture that when they were older.
Well, that sounds fair enough.
That's interesting. So there's something to be said about the fact that we do have choice now, so we can actually, people do get married older. I mean, I do think that's probably a better idea, really.
If you get married too young, it's,
just, you need to grow, you need to change with each other. I think that's very hard to do.
Day 30. Days of the week.
Now, last week, you told us about the origins of the days of the week. This evening, I thought you might like to tell us about the weekend. I mean, has the idea of the weekend always existed?
Well, there's traditionally always been a day of rest, the Sabbath.
But isn't the Sabbath a Saturday? I mean, I know the Italian and Spanish words for Saturday sound very like Sabbath.
That's true, but back in the 4th century A.D., the Roman Emperor Constantine decided that Sunday should be a day of rest, and he changed the original Latin name Dies Solis, which means Day of the Sun, to Dies de Dominica, which means Day of the Lord.
Lord as in God?
No, the Lord meant Jesus, since the day was supposed to commemorate his resurrection, which had of course been on a Sunday.
And presumably the Christians wanted to distinguish themselves from the Jews by having their day of rest on a different day.
Maybe, but in any case in Great Britain they passed all kinds of laws telling you what you could and could not do on a Sunday. For example, in the 8th century, servants were not allowed to travel on horseback on a Sunday, but if slaves were made to work, then their masters had to pay a hefty fine. In Elizabeth I's time, you also had to pay a big fine if you didn't go to church. Then, in the 17th and 18th centuries, they introduced other bizarre laws about bakers and fishing, hunting. For example, you weren't allowed to hunt game, deer, pheasants, or what have you, but you could kill rabbits.
But in any case, Sunday was still the first day of the week.
Right.
But how could it be both the first day of the week and part of the weekend, too?
Well, the idea of having a weekend is only quite recent. It was the result of some labour laws from around 1878, which introduced a 5-day working week. Until that time, people had been slogging away down the mines, in factories and sweatshops for 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. Weekend soon became an international rallying word, as other countries too wanted better working conditions.
One final question. Does everyone in the world now have a weekend?
That is the end of side 2.